Greetings, viewer. About this time last year and into early part of this year, I did a series of videos on a couple of board games, War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific, both of which date back to the 1970s, 1976 and 1977, I believe to be precise, which covered the World War II strategic naval warfare, War at Sea, Europe, Victory in the Pacific, obviously, in the Pacific. And I did a playthrough of the two games where I combined them into one game using several variants. On reflection, not happy with my efforts. Production qualities, well, they are what they are with an old bloke and his camera. But I felt I perhaps went about the whole thing the wrong way. It was meant to be a homage to a couple of dear friends, no longer with us. But we used to get together and play the heck out of these two games, and in particular, try all sorts of variants and combining the two games. On reflection, what I should have been doing was showing the viewer how the two games work, and then going through all the various variants, and trust me, there were buckets of them, explaining how they all work, what they add to the game, and then letting you, the viewer, the person who owns the game or games, deciding to either just leave the games as is and play them in their, shall we say, natural state, or whether you might like to try some of the various variants, or perhaps even ultimately putting the two games together and seeing what your experience is and what you could come up with. So I've thought long and hard about what I want to do, and I decided, well, look, let's start by comparing War at Sea. Now, I don't have my original Jedco copy, but I do have the Avalon Hill version, 1976. It doesn't actually say on the box there, but I think pretty sure it was 1976. The original, The War at Sea, which was exactly the same game by Jedco, John Edwards Design Company, 1975. I thought we would have a quick look at that game because they are introductory war games. They're not simulations in any sense of the word, but they are a lot of fun, and I think they portray the strategic situation quite well. But I thought we would compare the War at Sea, which was John Edwards' original design, with this one. Well, it's not going to let me back out. Victory at Sea, which was released in 1992, which was John Edwards' upgraded design of War at Sea. And I thought that might have been of interest to some people, as I understand, now I believe it's Compass, have re-released a version of Victory at Sea, apparently based on the original John Edwards design. I don't have a copy of that game, so I don't know what they may have changed and added to the Jedco 1992 version, but I thought at least I could give you a comparison between the two games, what's changed, what they've added, and that might give people a bit of information. Those who like these games, it might help them decide whether they want to purchase this new release by Compass. Apologies, I believe it is Compass, not GMT. I think GMT are the ones that have released the big new board game that, yes, yet again, is based on this original system, but it's got 1,400 counters, Seas of Thunder. But anyway, so that's what we're up to here. If you're into the intricacies of naval combat, Warning, go away. You will not like this. If you're following my channel at all, or having a look because of my interest in 15mm or 28mm miniatures, also go away. I doubt you will get much out of the video. But, you know, who knows, you might like something just to paint along to in the background. All right, enough piffle. Let's start the review. Okay, I've got the War at Sea game set up in front of us, sideways, simply so I could fit it in the camera. We'll try turning it lengthways and see how we go. Back in a sec. Okay, dear viewer, time's got away from me. It's heading into night time here in central Victoria. So I'm going to press on though. We'll see how we go. Apologies for the perhaps blue hue that may be coming across whatever I'm showing you. I've discovered that for some reason this particular table, the colouring, turns a lot of things whenever I'm filming miniatures or board games, tends to make things look blue for some reason. I've no idea why, whether it's a setting in the camera, etc. But anyway. So basic War at Sea, how do you win? It's an 8-turn game. You can see down here, this is what they call the reinforcement schedule, which I've already put the ships and whatever that are going to come on during the game. So it's an 8-turn game, and how you win the game is by having the most what they call points of control. You see this chart here with 10 at one end and 10 at the other. So that's Axis victory at one end, Allied victory down that end. You win the game by having the most points of control at the end of the 8th turn. Now, how do you get points of control? As you've already seen, the board, the sea areas are split, in the case of War at Sea, into 6 sea areas. For each sea area, there are 2 values. See if we can't hone in a bit. Let's have a look over here at the South Atlantic. Now you can see there, Axis 3, Allies 1. Now, so you win points of control by winning or controlling a particular sea area. That's the points of control. So if the Allies win it, they get 1 point. If the Axis, they get 3. Now, pretty much all the sea areas are weighted in favour of the Axis. So you get more points for controlling a sea area than if you do that if you're allies. And that is because it's basically asymmetrical warfare. Obviously, the British Americans have much larger fleets than the Axis counterparts. I think the original Jedco version only went up to 8 points of control at either end. Avalon Hill changed the other change that I know Avalon Hill made in the original Jedco design. Here in the North Sea, the Axis got 3, the Allies got 0. Don Greenwood's. They found in the play testing, they felt the game was too imbalanced in favour of the Axis. So Don Greenwood gave the Allies 1 point for control of the North Sea, and then they went ahead and published. They thought that was enough to balance the game. Generally speaking, in the early days at least, the Allies would stay out of the Mediterranean completely and would concentrate up here trying to bottle up the Germans, and then maybe if that went well, later on they'd try to head down to the Mediterranean. But anyway, that's by the by. Regarding the values, which I've commented or I put notes on in the video, for example, the Impero 466, as indicated, the 4 is the attack factor, 6 is the defense factor, And the third 6 over here, that's its speed factor. What does all that mean? 4, the attack factor, means that the Impero will roll 4 dice. The basis of the system is you're looking for 5s and 6s. A 6 is a hit, which you can then re-roll, and whatever number comes up, that's the amount of damage you inflict on a ship. A 5 is a disable result, which means that the targeted ship, if it's still afloat at the end of that round of combat, has to return to port. The middle figure, 6, the damage factor, defense factor, that's how many points of damage the ship can take before it's sunk. So if it gets up to 7 points of damage, in this case, the Impero would be sunk. The third number, that third 6, that's its speed. All ships can move 1 sea area from their port, from their base. So, for example, the Impero, an Italian ship, it would start in Italy. It can always sail into the Mediterranean Sea. If it wanted to go 2 sea areas out into the South Atlantic Ocean, now actually that's a bad example because the Impero can't do that, but for most ships, if they want to go a second sea area, what they do is they make a dice roll, and they must roll less than their speed factor. So the Impero had a speed factor of 6. It would have to roll 5 or less to be successful in moving 2 sea areas. If it failed that speed roll, it gets a choice. It can either return to a port or return to the port that it originally sailed from, or if there's a port available in the sea area that it's trying to get to, it can base itself there. Perhaps a more realistic one, if we have a look here, the Warspite 444. Now say the Warspite is based there in England and I want to get it down into the Mediterranean. No problems moving into the South Atlantic, doesn't have to make a speed roll or anything, it's simply there. But trying to get to the Mediterranean, that's a 2 sea area move. I would roll a dice and I would be looking for a focus. I would be looking for a 3 or less. If it gets a 3 or less on that die roll, it can take station, be on patrol if you like, in the Mediterranean Sea. If it failed, if it rolled a 4, 5 or 6, I would have a choice of either returning it to England or, fortunately the British have got a base down here, Malta. It couldn't take part in combat that round and it couldn't help try and control the area, but I could at least base it at Malta, so it was already there, ready to go for the next turn. Okay, I should have mentioned that the one other way of scoring points of control for the Allies is that they have 3 convoy counters. They start in the US. First turn that they come on, they can move into the North Atlantic Ocean. If at the end of that turn they survive, they can, what they call, put into England. And they score 1 point of control, or they can stay at sea and the next turn move to the Barents Sea, and if they survive there, they put into port up here in Russia, and that scores the Allies 3 points of control. Right, we'll finish with an example of combat, but before we get that, we'll talk about the capabilities of the different navies. Now, with the Italians, if they control the Mediterranean, or if they don't control the Mediterranean Sea for 4 consecutive turns, at the start of the last turn, turn 8, they have to roll to see whether they stay, access, they're sunk, or they actually become Allied ships. Now, that is, of course, assuming there's any Italian ships available at that stage. So 1 or 2 for each surviving Italian ship. If the Italians haven't controlled it for 4 turns, the Mediterranean, 1 or 2 Allied control, 3 or 4 scuttled, 5 or 6 German control. I mentioned before about my example with the Impero trying to get into the South Atlantic being a bad one. The only ships that can leave the Mediterranean for the Italians are the 4 cruisers, the 117s. Now, the other thing I may have forgotten to mention, you need to control a sea area to be able to move through it. So, for example, if the Allies control the Mediterranean Sea, even if possible, the Italians can't move through the Mediterranean Sea out into the South Atlantic. The Mediterranean Sea would have to either be uncontrolled or Italian control, or Axis controlled, for them to attempt to do so. Likewise, up here in the North Sea, shadow, or for the Germans to try and break out into the North Atlantic or South Atlantic, if the Allies control both the Barents Sea and the North Sea, the Germans would be blocked in. They would have to win one of those 2 sea areas before they could move ships out from Germany and Norway. Norway is considered part of Germany. They would have to win one of those sea areas before they could at least try and move out into the North Atlantic Ocean. And if they were trying to get down through the channel to the South Atlantic, they would most definitely have to win the North Sea. Russian ships can only ever enter the Baltic Sea. They have to roll a 5 or 6 to be able to sail, otherwise they stay in port. Ships that are in port can, if they do have a repair facility, which is this sort of number here, England 8, USA 10, Germany 8, that's under France 3. That's the number of damage points that can be repaired off ships per turn. So at the start of each turn, a player has to decide, okay, what ships am I going to send to sea? Ships that remain in port can be repaired using those repair points, but of course they can't use any more than the total number of repair points. So for example, if the German had 3 ships here that totaled, for argument's sake, 10 damage points, not sunk, but they had 10 damage points, they could only repair 8 points that turn. The land-based air markers are restricted into what sea areas they can go into. The Allies are particularly restricted to the North Sea and the Mediterranean. The Axis land-based air marker can go the Barents Sea, the North Sea, or the Mediterranean. Okay, with the perhaps major navies, although in this game the US isn't really a major navy, somewhat surprisingly. US ships at the start of turn 4, they roll for each individual ship. They need a die roll of 6 to enter the game. If they pass that die roll, the only sea area they can enter is the North Atlantic Ocean. After turn 4, in effect, you're adding 1 to the die roll. So on turn 5, US ships can enter on a die roll of 5 or 6. Turn 7, they can enter on a die roll of 4, 5, 6, etc. But they can only ever enter the North Atlantic Ocean. The British ships, the Baltic Sea, only Russian and German ships can enter that sea area. The British ships, they can start off based either in England or down in Malta, if you want to take on the Italians in the Mediterranean. But once you've done that, moving between those between those ports, you've got to try and move 2 sea areas and pass a speed roll. The one advantage the British have now, the Americans don't come in until turn 4, but as well as the 8 points in England, British ships that are perhaps damaged in the North Atlantic, they can return to the US to use those 10 points repair facilities, even if the US isn't actually in the war at that stage. With the Germans, on turns 1, 2 and 3, if they survive combat and control the North Atlantic or South Atlantic Ocean, there is an oilers rule. German ships in the North or South Atlantic may try to stay at sea and refuel with oilers. If successful, they may be placed in any sea area the following turn. So if you had the Bismarck here and it won the sea area and it tries to refuel oiler and successful, I take it from that there's no reason I don't know why you would, but there's no reason why you couldn't put it in the Mediterranean. But anyway, reading on. To successfully refuel at sea, the German player must roll 1 die per ship per turn. On turn 1, a roll of 1 to 5 is successful. On turn 2, a roll of 1 to 4. And finally, on turn 3, a die roll of 1 to 3 is necessary for success. Obviously, if they don't pass their oiler rule, they've got to return to a port. Now here in the South Atlantic, this neutral point here, neutral port, if you're forced to base here, you must sail on the next turn or lose 1 POC per ship per turn. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. That is the one other thing apart from the convoys that can get you or lose you some points of control. All right, let's set up a hypothetical turn and we'll just run through the basic combat system. It is very simple. It's people that didn't like the game called it Yahtzee at sea. It really is a buckets of dice system. But let's have a look. I should have pointed out, coming with the game, you need a fair few 6-sided dice. These counters here, on one side German marker, on the other side British. At the end of each turn, to show who controls a sea area, you simply place control markers, and as I say, what that means is that it blocks the opponent moving through that particular sea area. You can move into the sea area controlled by an enemy control flag, but you can't move through. So again, here the Italian cruisers couldn't move. Also, if that was, as I say, if that was British, the Italian cruisers couldn't try and sail out into the South Atlantic. They would be blocked here in the Mediterranean. Okay, so let's imagine it's turn 1. The Italian, I should mention that the order of movement is the Allies move first and then the Axis move second. So the Axis player always knows what he's going to be up against. So the Allies player moves his ships going 1 sea area to start with, and then he tries to move ships trying to move 2 sea areas, and he makes those speed rolls I talked about. And then the Axis player does the same. The Axis player has decided to send the cruisers herbing off to the South Atlantic, try and do some damage there. But here in the Mediterranean, the British player started by putting the 5 old R class, a couple of carriers and the repulse down here. The Italian player, there's no need for any speed rolls or anything of that nature. He's simply come out with his battleships. The Germans are supporting with a land-based air unit and 3 U-boats, the 3 U-boats that the Germans have got on turn 1. Okay, so the actual combat system, you start with anti-submarine warfare. There's 1 round of anti-submarine warfare, 1 round of air warfare, and then there is successive rounds of surface combat gunnery. Different, of course, in Victory in the Pacific, but we're not talking about that today. So, first off, anti-submarine warfare. Now, remember I said the 5 and 6 is the basis of the whole combat system. Each carrier counts as 3 anti-submarine combat points. Convoys also count as 3 anti-submarine convoy points, but obviously we don't have any convoys here. So that's 6 for the 2 carriers, and then 1 each for each battleship or cruiser. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got a total of 12 anti-submarine points. Now the Germans have got 3 submarines there, so that's not looking particularly good. So we'll do it in 2 rolls of 6 and just see if the Germans survive. If any of those U-boats survive in any sea area, then they block the Allies from controlling that sea area. So even if, say, if one of those German U-boats survives, even if the Allies win the subsequent battle with the Italian fleet, the Allies will not be able to put a control marker down in the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so U-boats block control. But anyway, let's start. I think the odds are very much here in favour of the Allies. So we've got 12 dice, looking for 5 or 6. Come up here a little bit. Okay, so we've got 1 6, so that's 1 sub sunk. So we take that sub away. Okay, now we've still got another. Sorry, had to cut out there for a sneeze. We've still got another 6 anti-submarine dice left. Oh dear. So another couple of 6s. So all the Axis submarines have been sunk. So that's most unfortunate. The other thing is, had any of the submarines survived, they would have been entitled to shoot a free shot at any one of the Allies' ships. But anyway, not to be. Don't you just love it when dice go careering off into the distance? Okay, after the submarine section, then comes the air combat section, or phase. Now the Allies have got 3 for the Ark Royal, 1 for the Eagle, so that's a total of 4. Now what they can target is 1 shot per ship, so they can shoot at 4 ships. So they're going to go for the Vittorio Veneto, the Littorio, the Caio Dillo, and the Andrea Doria. Now we'll do those in 2 lots of 2. So first off, one of the Vittorio Veneto, and we're looking for a 5 or 6. A 5 is even better because it sends it back to port. And we get a 6, so that's a hit. All right, so we might as well do the damage roll. So for each 6, you roll a dice, and that's the number of damage points you inflict. And we get 4. So that means that we are entitled to put 4, sorry, my arm. We're entitled to put 4 damage on the Vittorio Veneto. Now we'll talk about the effect that damage has in a minute. Okay, so then the next dice at the Littorio gets another hit. gets a 5. Wowza. Those swordfish are really going berserk today. Sorry about my arm again. Okay, 1 at the Duello. Gets a 6. Only gets 1 point of damage this time. 1 point of damage on the Duello. And then the last shot at the Andrea Doria only gets a 3, so that missed. So that was an extraordinary round for the British Air. Now these results are simultaneous. Not that it really matters because they can't attack the land-based air anyway, but say later on in the game, one of the quirks is that the Graf Zeppelin makes an appearance. Now, had the Graf Zeppelin for some reason been here and had been damaged or even sunk, it still gets to shoot. Its combat is, after the anti-submarine warfare combat is simultaneous. Anyway, so the German has got 3 land-based air. Now, he's not going to waste time on the Ark Royal or Eagle. He's going for Royal Oak, Revenge and Royal Sovereign. So first dice, nothing. Second dice, I should really roll it separate, shouldn't I? So first dice with nothing. Second dice, nothing. Third dice, gets a disable, 5. Okay. So what we do, that meant the Royal Sovereign gets a disable result because of that 5. Now, once the air combat's finished, land-based air don't count for control in a sea area, so it would go back to base. We've got some very heavily damaged Italian ships there. The Royal Sovereign has been disabled, even though it's not damaged. So it must return to base, return to a port, and the only one available in the sea area is Malta. So we'll put that there with a disabled result to show that it's out of the upcoming combat. Okay, so for each point of damage, the speed of a ship is reduced. So in other words, over here we've got Vittorio Veneto. It's got 4 damage. So that means that its speed factor, that third number, is reduced to 2. The Littorio has got 5 damage, so its speed's reduced to 1. And the Duillo has got 1 point of damage, so its speed is reduced to 4. Okay, so the Italian player, who's got some fairly serious damage on his 2 best battleships, he can attempt to disengage, i.e. run away. Now they can run away as a group of all 6 ships, or they can run away, they can actually split up into separate groups. Each group has a speed, and that is the speed of its slowest ship. The British, if the Italians were to run away, and they're not going to, but if they were to run away, the British are allowed to pursue, provided their ships are equal to or faster than the ships that they are pursuing. However, in this case, the Italians are not going to run away. What the Italians are going to do is they're going to fight a surface combat. Now, as mentioned, that damage has really slowed down those 2 Italian ships there, but fortunately the damage does not equal their defence factor, so they'll still be rolling 4 dice in combat. So somewhat cheekily, what the Italian player is going to do, he's going to attack. What you have to do is you have to line up against other ships, like so, for combat. Now, the Italian player could add this to one of these combats, but because he's attacking each and every other British surface ship, he is allowed to attack one of the carriers, which is, of course, bad news for the British. I should point out that the British, they themselves could actually disengage and run away. Looking at this situation, they might, before this actually occurs, they might say, oh, well, actually our carriers could be attacked, so we're going to run away. So they could send the Ark Royal as a separate group. Now, it's got a speed of 7. And nothing that the Italians have got, even in the undamaged ships, could be shooting at it. The British would be going at the speed of their lowest speed, which is 3. Ark Royal would automatically get away. Now, Vittorio Veneto's got a speed of 2, so it couldn't actually chase. Littorio's down to 1, so it couldn't actually chase. The Caudillo has got a speed of 4, which is more than enough to match the 3. Now, so if the British did that, then the Italians might say, yeah, we're going to have 4 ships against their at least 5. Eagle wouldn't have to participate in the combat. So the Italians might say, yeah, bye-bye Brits, we'll just control the Mediterranean. But for argument's sake, no, we're going to say that the British are staying and the Italians have also staying. So let's see what happens. Okay, very bloody and nonetheless interesting round of combat. The Italians, who couldn't hit the side of the barn door with their Savoia Machete 79 land-based air or the Junkers 87s, really stepped up with the gunnery. You can see the damage there. Often the Italian ships were rolling at least 2 6s with each volley. So the Repulse sunk. Vermilies sunk. Resolution has got 4 points of damage on it, so you can't get below a speed of 1. So it's a speed of 1, and it's going to be firing with 1 dice. Revenge is sunk. The Royal Oak disabled, so it's going to have to go to Malta. Very fortunately, the volleys from the Vittorio Veneto only disabled the Ark Royal. I was thinking I could have actually put the Eagle, because at least it's got a gunnery factor. It could have joined the battle line, which would have forced the Vittorio Veneto to fire at it. But at least it would have had 1 shot coming back. But then it can only take 2 damage, although so can the Ark Royal. But anyway, so the Ark Royal is also disabled. It must go to Malta. So, yes, not looking particularly good for the British. However, they didn't go down without fighting. The Guello Cesare disabled, so it must go back to port at Italy. Conte di Cavour sunk. Andrea Doria has got 2 damage, so it's still going to fire with 4 dice, but its speed is reduced to 3. 6 extra points of damage on the Caudillo. So Caudillo has gone glug glug. And so we've got Littorio, we've got Vittorio Veneto. So all those Italian ships are damaged. However, they're still going to be firing their full complement of dice. so that would be 12 dice. The British are down to one shot go there plus another shot here. So the British will try and retreat. They will retreat in two groups. They will retreat the Eagle as one group and the damaged Resolution as another. So it's got a speed of 2. Now, Vittorio Veneto, 4 damage, its speed is reduced to 2, so it cannot chase the Eagle, but it can catch this particular ship. Likewise, the Littorio can chase the damaged battleship. The Andrea Doria, 2 damage reduces it to 3, but it likewise, that's still less than the Eagle. So the Eagle is going to get away, and the poor old, sorry about my arm in the way all the time. The poor old Resolution looks like it's pretty doomed. I'll come back to you in a minute. Yeah, as predicted, the one shot from the British ship didn't do anything. And the 12 shot, all it needed was 1-6, and that was going to be enough regardless to sink it. And so that has been sunk as well. So, the much damaged Italian fleet controls the Mediterranean. You get to put a axis control marker. Come back out again. So you get the axis control marker. The Axis get 2 points. Don't worry about my little letraset. My little letraset number there, that's a variant. So the Axis get 2 points for controlling the Mediterranean. So what would happen is that the points of control, so if they were starting here at 0, so if this is turn 1, would start out by moving that 2 points in the direction of Axis, would move that 2 points in the direction of Axis victory. So what you do, though, usually is you total up all the points. Now, say if the British control the South Atlantic, North Atlantic and North Sea, they got 3 POC, 3 points of control. And for argument's sake, let's say that the Germans, or the Axis rather, control the Barents Sea, which is worth 2. There's no Russian sailing, so by simply putting a ship there, the Germans will get 1 for the Baltic. That's 3. So that would cancel out the 3 that the Allies have got there. And then, of course, the Axis have won the Mediterranean. So the Axis would have a total of 5. 2, 3, 5. The Allies would have 3. 1, 2, 3. Difference of 2. So you would move the points of control chart 2. Let's say, for example, if the Germans didn't pursue into, or weren't able to put a ship into the Baltic Sea, and so they only got the 4, 2 for the Mediterranean, 2 for the Barents. Obviously 4 minus 3 is 1, so you would only move it 1 point of control in the direction of the Axis victory. So that's basically how it works. You have combat wherever applicable in any of the sea areas to try and win points of control. Allies, of course, can try and get points of control by getting convoys in. And at the end of the game, whoever's in the positive wins. And that's pretty much it. It's a fairly, pretty simple game system. Some people would say too simple, too simplistic. But it's a lot of fun. At the end of the turn, now the disabled markers come off. The ships go, as my old friend Alex would used to say, back to base for the Italians. Now you can see the Italians here have got a total of 9 points of damage, but Italy can only repair 4 points. So the Italians next turn would have a choice. Now they could take 2 off that and 2 off that, or they could take all 4 off that, or just take all 4 off Vittorio Veneto and leave these 2 damaged. They can still sail, they can still come out and fight, but obviously with reduced speed and reduced damage capability, it wouldn't take much to sink them, so it's probably not a great idea. Okay, let's wrap it up there and some thoughts. Well, dear viewer, it's now morning. Even I couldn't press on last night. If you've been watching all this far and you still haven't lost the will to live, I can only congratulate you and suggest that the government should be in contact with you as a person of extreme fortitude. War at sea, victory at sea. So we've had a look at the basics of war at sea and how it works. So how does victory at sea, 1992 Jedco, change all that? There are both subtle and obvious differences, both of which can have a dramatic effect on gameplay. Now, first off, War at Sea, 6 pages worth, but basically it's only the first 1, 2, 3 and a bit pages are actual rules. Most of page 4, page 5 are just an example of combat. Finishing on page 6, and then you've got the advertising blurb. Victory at Sea is also 6 pages, and it does have a small example, but here you're pretty much looking at 6 pages of rules, which, you know, is still small compared to most rule books. But the point in me showing you this is to perhaps make an excuse for myself, but to point out that Victory at Sea is, while based on War at Sea, it is a more complicated game. Not only that, but I am old, I make mistakes, I'm human, and I forget things. So if you are watching by now, you are doubtless a devotee, and you're probably screaming at the screen saying, Ian, what about this? Ian, what about that? You'll just have to bear with me, perhaps put something down in the comments below if I've missed something that you think is absolutely vital. Okay, let's zoom back in again if I can. No, it's not going to let me do it. The good news, if you have War at Sea, the only actual counters that you will add to play Victory at Sea are these two. Now, these 2 counters are actually from a copy of L2 Designs Group's version of the game, which I no longer have, but fortunately I had the foresight to hang on to a couple of the pieces. With this particular game, rather poor form by Jedco. These Admiral counters, 1 for each side, they were nothing more than bits of very flimsy cardboard. Both sides get a counter of these each. Basically, what you do is you simply add them to an EC area, and they assist by any ships that are trying to travel to sea areas, to that area, get a extra +1 on their on the number required to make the transfer. So say, for example, I've got ships here in England. I want to get them down to the Mediterranean. I put my Admiral counter down here in the Mediterranean. Now, say a ship that would normally only make it on, let's just pluck one at random. Okay, what have we got here? We've got Warspite. So normally, to make the 2C area move, I would need to make a speed roll and I would have to get 3 or less. 3, 2, 1. If I got a 4, 5, 6, the ship would fail the speed roll and would either have to return to port in England or go to port in Malta. Now, by having the Admiral counter here, the Allied Admiral counter, that increases that number there, that 4, that increases that to a 5, which now means I'd make the speed roll successfully on a roll of 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, that mightn't sound like much, but on a 6-sided die, you're going from a 50% chance of making it to a, 66.6, whatever, chance of making it. Likewise, if the British say they lose the battle here and they're trying to retreat, the Admiral adds 1 to the speed number there. So they're the only 2 actual extra counters. You could easily make those up yourself. Okay, pressing on. Immediate obvious differences via the map board. It's now a 9-turn game, not an 8-turn game. So if you're using your war at sea counters, just be a little bit careful. As I say, it's exactly the same ships and U-boats, etc., etc. But it's a 9-turn game, so just be a little bit careful when you're laying out your ships as the reinforcements. Big change with the repair facilities. Now, you notice here, let's just use the Germans as an example. 522. Now, remember, in original War at Sea, you just simply got 8 repair points, and you could apply those 8 repair points to any ships in any combination. Now, no. Each one of these, I would almost call them little factory symbols, actually represent a repair dock. So in effect, and you can only have one ship being repaired at each dock per turn. So in effect, the Germans can only repair 3 ships per turn here. Now, not only that, but destroyed U-boats, which in War at Sea would simply become automatically available further down the turn time track as and when they became available. Now, no, you have to rebuild destroyed U-boats, and you do that by having one of these docks without a ship in it, and you can use that dock for that turn to rebuild a U-boat. German ships and U-boats can use the French port when that's available. The values are slightly changed. I think it was 8 for Germany in the basic War at Sea game. It's now 9. So there are a few changes. We'll just go panning round the board. British the same here. Now they've only got 3. So 3, 2, 2, which is 7. In the original War at Sea, they had 8. But they're allowed to use they're allowed to use the United States repair facilities, which is once again 10. So you've got 3 repair docks there. Other big changes, hard to know where to start really. The original War at Sea by Jedco only had 8 in either direction. You'll notice War at Sea, it was 10 in either direction. Here it's been reduced to 7 in each direction. But another big major difference is that in the other games, if somebody during the game got out to the most points they could possibly be in front, apart from the obvious, simply, how the hell am I going to claw that many points back? There was no consequence in letting your opponent max out to the maximum they could be in front. In this game, not so. If you let your opponent get that far in front, there are consequences. Yeah, any turn the allied point of control is 7, the Axis player loses the use of his admiral, oilers and airstrike marker. Any turn the Axis point of control is 7, the allied player loses the use of his admiral, the home fleet force, and Italy and France will not surrender. We'll get into exactly what all that means as we're going through the rule changes. You'll notice immediately that England and the US have what they call reaction forces, British Home Fleet and North Atlantic Reaction Force. In the standard war at sea, all the Allied ships go first, then the Axis ships go second. Not so in this game. These particular, or the British Home Fleet in particular, moves after the Axis fleet has moved. The other change is that in this game, the Italians actually move before anybody else. So it's Italians, then the Allies, and then the Germans. As those of you eagle-eyed will have noticed, yes, there is one extra sea area, the Caribbean, depending on how you want to pronounce it. The values for the points of control are pretty much the same as the original Jedco War at Sea. Now remember that Avalon Hill changed it so in the North Sea the the Allies got 1 point instead of 0. In this game it's back to 0. Mediterranean Axis 2, Allies 1. A big difference is here in the Baltic. In this game it's Axis 1, Allies 3. So if those two Russian ships, or even one of them, get to sail at all, and you haven't got a German ship or something to drive it off there in the Baltic Sea, that can be a big game changer. We mentioned delving a little bit into the rules, but it's sort of, you get a hint from it here. Convoys. There's still only 3 convoy markers, but this time, once they're sunk, they keep coming back. A little bit like U-boats in War at Sea. So that is a big, big change. Also, perhaps the last major item we can see here on the map, no longer free and unhindered use of the English Channel and the Straits of Gibraltar by Axis forces. Any Axis ships passing through either the English Channel or through the Straits of Gibraltar, as indicated by these little mine markers and by this artillery marker here, are attacked as they pass through. On a die roll of 6, they just get an automatic 1 point of damage. And as per the standard rules, on a die roll of 5, they're disabled and have to return to a port. Now you might say, well, why only just an automatic damage of 1 instead of rolling for damage as per the standard rules? It might seem insufficient, but remember, German ships without damage get the attack bonus. So they hit on 5 and 6 and disable on a 4. Now, if they're passing through the English Channel and they get 1 damage point on them, they lose that combat bonus. So that's quite significant. And I think this might be the last thing that's obvious on the board. There is a U-boat technology rules, which we'll get into in the rules. It can either increase the anti-submarine warfare capability of the Allies, or it can increase the lethality of the U-boats in any particular sea area. Slight change up here. I think this is called Russia in the War at Sea. It's now just called Murmansk. Okay, let's try and explain some of the rules. Just quickly, folks, a couple of items. Turn 1, it's only the cruisers that can move to sea areas. Puzzled by that one. How are you meant to get the, say, pocket battleship down into the South Atlantic at the start of the game as it did historically? But anyway, that's the rule. Turn 1, cruisers only can move to sea areas. Limited intelligence. If you controlled a sea area the previous turn, you are allowed to put up to 2 ship counters upside down into that sea area the following turn, so that your opponent doesn't know what exactly you've got based there. France, the port, interesting one, this one, comes into the game on turn 2. Now, unlike War at Sea, where it simply ceases to be a port at the end of turn 6, in Victory at Sea, on turn 5 or 6, if the Allies controlled both the North Sea and the South Atlantic, the previous turn, they can invade France. A convoy must be in the sea area, must be in the South Atlantic Sea area, and be placed in France at the end of the turn. The Allies receive 2 points of control and the convoy is removed to come back later in the game as a reinforcement. Turns 7 to 9, as above, except the Allies do not have to control any areas the previous turn. The Caribbean Sea, or Caribbean, however you want to pronounce it, turns 4 to 9 only. One of the quirks of the combat system is that often having 4 single cruisers against a single battleship, the odds are actually in favour of the cruisers, because the battleship cannot split its fire, even something like the mighty Bismarck. If it's undamaged 4, so it's hitting on 5s and 6s and disabling on a 5. That's for the simple reason that you've got 4 shots going backwards and forwards, but the poor old Bismarck can only shoot at 1 ship at a time. So the odds often turn out that while the Bismarck may sink 1 or 2 of the British ships, perhaps disable another, one of these cruisers will get in even just a disable shot. So in an attempt to offset this particular problem, they've introduced a thing called secondary fire. Ships with a firepower of 2 or more have secondary armament. This is not generally used except that after the first round of combat, when, query, the range has been reduced. Ships that are outnumbered, it's important to remember that they've got to be outnumbered, can use their secondary armament against enemy cruisers. If the side with the lesser number of ships, not including convoys and carriers, does not fire at any ship twice, but engages as many ships as it can, it may then fire at surplus unattacked cruisers once each, with secondary armament from some of its larger warships. A ship may only fire its secondary armament once per turn at 1 surplus enemy cruiser, with the following result. 1 to 4 is a miss, 5 is disabled, and 6 is a hit, but it's automatically just 1 point of damage. I've rarely, if ever, used that rule. I have my own little system, but I should point out that at least that it is there. One of the more excellent rules, I think, Victory at Sea has is damage control. Now, these counter values, I think are ridiculous, and they get changed in some variants. Anyway, having said that, normally 496, until the Bismarck gets 9 damage points on it, it's still going to be firing with 4 guns. Now, the minute it gets 1 point of damage on it, of course, it loses that German gunnery bonus, but still 9 points of damage before its gunnery is affected. Now, damage, of course, affects the speed as per the standard rules. Now, in Victory at Sea, once you get to 3 damage, you're considered critically damaged. And I shall read, roll 1 die before they fire during each round of combat. This is done after targets have been selected. A roll of 1 to 5 indicates how many guns or salvos in action that turn, without exceeding a ship's maximum. So in other words, I might roll a 5, but the Bismarck still only has 4, so it would only get to roll 4 guns. A 5 also means that 1 point of damage is repaired by the crew. Reduce the damage marker immediately by 1. On a roll of 6, the ship suffers an internal explosion. The ship automatically receives another point of damage and cannot fire at the enemy that round. Now notice it says round, not turn. Before a critically damaged ship rolls the dice, the opponent must state which, if any, of his ships are firing at it, in case their critically damaged target explodes and sinks, as combat is simultaneous. So in other words, say if the Bismarck was firing at say the hood or something down here, it doesn't really matter what it's firing at. Say the British player down here had the hood and it was determined to fire at the Bismarck. The British player or the Allied player would have to say that that ship is shooting at the Bismarck before the Bismarck did this die roll. Very interesting rule. I like it. The United States, unlike War at Sea, the United States automatically enters the war on turn 4. Its ships can go to any sea areas. The North Atlantic Reaction Force consists of the Washington and Tuscaloosa. Any turn, including prior to turn 4, if the Axis have controlled the North Atlantic Ocean, these 2 ships come into the game. Otherwise, the American ships enter as per the reinforcement chart, the turn chart. Now, there's only a total of 6 American ships. Each turn, 1 of them must be placed in the Caribbean Sea area. Moving on to the Regia Marina. Now, in Victory at Sea, the entire Italian fleet can actually leave the Mediterranean and try and make a move into the South Atlantic. But remembering, of course, they get shot at by Coral Sea, and also 2 conditions. The Mediterranean Sea must have been controlled by the Axis the previous turn. If that's the case, then the 4 Italian cruisers, or however many cruisers there still are, can attempt to move into the South Atlantic Ocean. Even the big Italian battleships can attempt to do so, but provided the Mediterranean Sea was Italian, controlled by the Axis the previous turn, and remembering that in this game the Italians move first before the Allies, as well as the Axis having to control the Mediterranean, there must be no British battleships based in Malta for the Italian battleships to attempt to move out of the Mediterranean into the South Atlantic. Moving on to the Royal Navy, they play pretty much as per War at Sea. However, they do have these 3 boxes here for the British Home Fleet. Now you'll notice there I've got 3 counters there and they're turned upside down. I'll just read the rule. Up to 3 British ships can be placed upside down in the Home Fleet boxes on the map board. During combat, the Home Fleet can sail together as one fleet into any area adjoining England. So in other words, after one round of combat in the North Sea, North Atlantic or South Atlantic, these 3 British, or it can be up to 3 British ships, it doesn't have to be 3, the Home Fleet, can attempt to move into that area. They arrive as a group. Now each ship must make a speed roll as if it was moving to sea areas. So obviously it's usually a good idea to put your faster ships there. Now you'll see there, excuse my arm, you'll see that I've got the Formidable, Howe and the Sussex. Now the Howe will still have to make a speed roll, but it's only got a 1 in 6 chance of failing. Now successful Home Fleet ships join the combat for the second round after any carrier with the Home Fleet has had its airstrike. Combat still occurs if all Allied ships were sunk in the first round of combat, although Axis ships could withdraw and be pursued as normal before the second round of combat. Okay, the Kriegsmarine. I've answered my own question about how the German Navy might get the pocket battleships into the South Atlantic and North Atlantic on turn 1, as they did historically. The German Euler rule is slightly different. At the end of any turn, any German ships in the Caribbean Sea, North Atlantic or South Atlantic can attempt to stay at sea and be refueled by Eulers. So you're not limited to turns 1, 2 and 3 as you are in War at Sea. It goes the whole game. Roll 1 dice per ship. On a 3 to 6 successful, place these ships in the Eulers circle on the board as such. And the next turn they may be placed in any sea area except the Baltic Sea. If they roll a 1 or a 2, they're out of fuel, and the German ship gets placed in the neutral port down here, which, remember, can potentially cost you points of control. Reduce the dice roll by 1 for each of the 3 sea areas, the Caribbean Sea, North Atlantic or South Atlantic Ocean, the Allies control at the end of the current turn. So in other words, it lasts the whole game. It can be any German ship. You can attempt to refuel. If you're successful, you can go into any sea area except the Baltic Sea. You're successful on a 3 to 6, but it's -1 for any one of these 3 areas that the Allies control. And if you fail the roll, you head down to the neutral port. And what I said about answering my question, the 2 pocket battleships, or it says not 2, not the, but 2 pocket battleships marked 225 can start the game in the Eulers area and may be placed as above on turn 1. So in other words, yes, you could have the, I think it was the Graf Spee and the Lützow. You can start them in the Euler box, and then they can be placed in any sea area on turn 1, so i.e. Graf Spee for historical purposes into the South Atlantic and the Lützow into the North Atlantic. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the Lutzow that was renamed such. It was originally called the Deutschland. Speaking of the German surface raiders, lone German pocket battleships, again in those three areas, the North Atlantic, South Atlantic or Caribbean Sea, remember they have to be on their own, have the option before any combat to declare themselves to be a raider. Raiders cannot control a sea area, but the Allies also lose control unless the raider is sunk. So they become a little bit like U-boats. Now, if they do declare themselves a raider, only faster ships can attack at the Allied player's option. Now, the British home fleet can attempt to intercept the raider. So, say if there's nothing there that's fast enough to catch the raider at the end of the first round of combat, which would be null and void, the British home fleet can attempt to intercept. They must roll 1 dice instead of a speed roll with the following results. 1 to 4, the raider eludes them. Home fleet spends turn in port. 5, one faster ship, speed 6 or 7 obviously, because they're a speed 5. Where are we? One faster ship finds the raider, and hence they'll have combat, while other ships must stay in port. 6, all ships in the home fleet, regardless of speed, find the raider. And then the airstrikes, if the home fleet happens to have a carrier, the airstrike is slightly different. You still only get to roll 1 dice. It has the following effect. 1 to 4, no result. 5, the raider's oiler is sunk. The raider cannot be refueled at the end of the turn. And 6, 1 hit with 1 damage point. And I mentioned previously about how now with the U-boats and the repair facilities, how that's different from the original war at sea. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything. Something I may have neglected to mention, the Italians moving first, they can attempt to evade. The British now moving second. The Italians can attempt to evade. I won't go into the details of how all that works. Okay, so all of that perhaps a bit dry and boring, but it should make sense to those of you who have at least war at sea. And as I say, the purpose of this video is perhaps to help you decide whether you want to amend your game or even go so far as to purchase Compass Games' re-release of Victory at Sea. Okay, I shall review all my footage. If I see anything that I've missed, I will put it in the comment section below. As I mentioned earlier, if you see anything that you think I've missed that should be mentioned, please put it in the comment section below. If you would either A, like to see a game of Victory at Sea played in its stock standard rule format, or perhaps more particularly B, if you would like me to run through a lot of the variants that I have got the information on that you could possibly apply to both War at Sea, Victory at Sea, and also Victory in the Pacific, leave a comment in the section below. All right, thank you for bearing with me. Bit of a dry subject, and I say very much a niche market, not for everybody. For those of you who do have an interest in these games, this may well be the last video that I'm going to do on these particular games. From hence, I will be concentrating on my miniatures. That is, unless, of course, somebody requests a playthrough of this game or a review of some of the various variants over the years. I have discovered that, in fact, there's even a tribute to the robust of this system. There is a ship of the line sail version of using this basic system called Royal Sovereign, I believe. Never played it, but there you go. All right, thank you everyone for your time. Take care of everyone, and see you again soon. Bye for now.